Hey Glenn, you want to grab a drink at the hotel lobby bar?
Hey man, yeah, I'd love to grab a drink at the bar, but listen, I got to stop by my bank and take out a line of credit for my cocktail. These drink prices are out of control.
Do you live, eat, and sleep the hotel industry? Looking to brush up on your game? You've come to the right place. Welcome to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to this week's No Vacancy with me, Glenn Hausman. I'm very excited, as always, to have each and every one of you are on board. And if you're new to the show, hey, thank you so much for listening. And if you've been around for a while, it would be great if you guys could give me that 5-star rating on iTunes. It really does help. I could really use a little bit more of the love as we're getting set to celebrate this holiday season here in the United States and around the world. I'd really appreciate it. Really helps other people discover the show. You're already liking it. It'd be great if you could share that with other people. And if you'd like to get our Sunday night newsletter, simply text the word hotel to 66866. That's right. Put in the little text thing where you dial number 66866 and then write hotel. That's 66866. And be sure to check everything out at novacancynews.com. Now, before we get going, important to say that this show is brought to you in part by Duetto, the revenue strategy technology platform thousands of hotels are using to make more money. Go check out getrevenueresults.com. That's getrevenueresults.com. You're going to hear really great videos that are out there that really show you the transformation of how a team can be much better if you have the right tools in place. Without those tools, you're kind of wandering around aimless, right? Right tools, got good focus, going to do the right job. And also, I thought it'd be great if you haven't checked out some of the other shows we have here on the No Vacancy Network. It'd be great. Go check they're all available on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play and all that kind of stuff. Of course, the show Checking In with Anthony and Glenn, which I co-host with Travel Channel's Hotel Impossible host, Anthony Melchiori. The Hotel Design Podcast, which features some of the top folks within the design business. I can't wait if you guys are big fans of the design side of the business. Our new show is with Lauren Rote. That's out right now, and I've got so many great interviews in the can. For example, I got Beth Wilson, the CEO of Wilson Associates, which I just recorded the same day as I'm recording this. I got Mr. Roger Thomas from Wynn. That is an incredible interview that I can't wait for you guys to hear. I've got Paul Steelman, who's been developing and designing casinos for many, many decades. So many more. I got a great one coming up shortly with Amy Hulbert of Best Western, all about the new brands and the design approach that they take. So super fun, super interesting show. And of course, Checking In with Anthony and Glenn is all about career empowerment and the issues in the hospitality industry that mean the most to you. Also, thanks Red Roof for being a great sponsor of the show. I really appreciate it. Man, that's a whole lot of talk. Not a whole lot of information that you guys I know are craving, but I think that's kind of what this first half of the show is going to be a little bit about. I've been traveling so much over the last few months. It's been an absolutely incredible experience going around the world, going around the country, getting to get out there and meet all of the people that are watching the show or listening to the show, I should say, and getting to do a lot of speaking engagements around the world and shooting some great videos for Here to Stay TV, all of which are available on novacancynews.com. So I don't have a guest on this first half of the show. In the second half of the show, I got one, but for this one, I just wanted to talk to you guys for a little bit. It's been a little while since we had a little one-on-one, emotional, intimate time between us, and I really like it. So let me just tell you what I've been up to. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to give the keynote address during the luncheon for the California Lodging Industry Association's annual conference. More than 500 folks gathered at the Commerce Casino there in Los Angeles, and it was really a great experience to be able to help educate a lot of the hoteliers out there that are just so focused on the daily operations of their business. They're not really thinking about all the major changes that are happening in the industry. They're not really thinking about how things are different today as they were even just a few years ago. So I spoke to this organization all about how storytelling is really the future of being able to make those critical emotional connections with the guests. I speak about that topic a lot on the road, and it's so important because right now, clean, comfortable rooms, right now, great design, all of that is really just what you have to do to get started in the hospitality industry. It's not enough to just do that and be done with that, right? Because if you're not connecting with the guests in a special way, and I say that happens a lot of times with human interactions, then you're really missing out on potential, and you're not going to be able to keep top of mind with the guest, right? Unless someone goes away just once a year, it's going to be very hard for them to remember who you are. I think about all the folks that I'm on the road with all of the time. And it's never-ending travel schedules that we all seem to have, us road warriors that are out there. I mean, I think it's 2018. We're wrapping up now. I've probably spent around 100 nights on the road. Who knows how many hotels I have? I keep all of my little card keys, and I have a little pile of them. So it's kind of like, you could go back in time with, in history as to every single hotel that I've stayed at. And I got a giant stack of them this year, let me tell you. So the problem is I look back and I can't even remember some of the hotel experiences that I've had within the last couple of months. Yeah, sure. Some of it is because I'm traveling so much, but some of it is because they're just delivering a clean, comfortable room, and they're not really doing anything in these hotels to make me feel extra special, not doing anything to make me really remember the experience that I have. Again, fine, normal, great. I got nothing to complain about, but I've also have nothing great to say. And if you don't have anything to complain about and you don't have anything great to say, you're going to quickly disappear into the, effluvia of just all those hotel stays that we've all been in for years after years after years. Hey, heck it, even if you had a really horrible stay, at least you'd be remembered that way, right? You remember the property. If you don't, you just will be forgotten. And that's the biggest problem that I see with hotels out there. Everybody's doing a great job. Everybody's doing a nice job. But are you really doing a job that gets people to remember who you are once they leave and check out of your property? My biggest concern is no, we're not doing enough of that. And what it's leading to is the desire for other people to come into the industry and reinvent our industry. That's why I talk so much about service departments, different types of extended stay properties. Next week, I'm delivering to a major hotel company a keynote speech on the convergence in hospitality that I see. The fact that going forward, the traditional hotel is going to be changing. We're seeing more of the idea of communal living in residences. We're getting rid of our cars because we can use Uber. So the world itself is fundamentally changing. Heck, we're probably even going to get rid of owning homes one day. At least some of us will, because of the whole idea of being a digital nomad and traveling around the world and not being tied down to somewhere. And there are a lot of new hospitality environments that are being created that understand that we're in a world where digital nomads exist, where folks want to get together and work in a singular place. That's why WeWork and all these other types of brands are so successful in that space. And I believe fundamentally we're going to see a major hotel company debut a brand that has the co-located workspace, has co-located living space in it, has the whole notion of reinventing the way hotels are. You don't have to be a hotel. We're already moving more towards that whole extended stay experience. Why can't you appeal to folks to stay for a week, a month, a year, should they choose to? It's not an unusual thing, right? You think back 100 years ago, people traditionally, a lot of folks lived in hotels. It wasn't so odd to live in a hotel on Park Avenue, for example, and that would be your main residence. Somewhere along the line, I think probably after World War II, and you guys could correct me on this, that sort of thing started to go away. But it used to be, boarding houses and hotels, they were all kind of like the same thing. They all had that long-term element. It wasn't just about that transient stay. And just like in food and beverage, I think we're going back to that. Remember when food and beverage used to be the center of so many communities, the hotel, food and beverage, I would say. Everyone would go to dinner at that great hotel in downtown, right? That went away. And then it returned again at some point. It was really, it's really exciting to see how amazing food and beverage is, how it's becoming part of the local community again. And I think the whole idea of hotels and being positioned locally to appeal towards locals is going to start to morph into this co-located workspace, this co-located living space, all of these things that we don't fully understand. Okay, so today, I've got a great interview, which I'll explain in 1 second. But for the rest of this month, and probably into the beginning of next year, I've got some amazing interviews with CEOs of some terrific hotel companies. These are some of the mid-sized brands that we don't normally think of. We're so focused on the major giant branding companies, the ones that own 15 different brands, 20 different brands, even 30 plus different brands under one roof. No, we're going to be talking to some great companies from around the world that are part of a group called the Global Hotel Alliance. These are smaller, mid-sized companies that have all kind of gotten together to help with their marketing rewards programs called Discovery. It's really cool. It's really interesting. Because of that, I've got great interviews with companies such as the CEOs of Corinthia Hotels, the CEO of the Lungarno Collection, the CEO of Meritage Collection, and the CEO of Viceroy Hotels and Resorts. And that's just getting us started. I'll have some more great interviews in 2019. Oh, a lot of great CEOs. It's so much fun to get out there on the road and to see how people are responding to the show and how much easier it is for me to get some of these CEO types to talk to you and me each and every week because they understand what we're after. We're trying to educate our audience here, and we're having such an amazing time doing it, and these folks want to jump in on the conversation. So as I am recording this show, which is the same morning as I'm releasing the show, China has been in the news big time, right? And, the whole idea of tariffs have been freaking people out. When I was at BDNY last month, it's all people could talk about is what's going to be happening with these tariffs. What's going to be happening with these tariffs? Right now, we seem to be having a little bit of a delay. I couldn't tell you on the long term what's going to happen, but it's fundamentally freaking everybody out right now. And I hope the United States figures that out. But the thing that concerns me more is the fact that the United States of America is no longer the top tourism country. China is now beating us out. Yes, that's absolutely true. China is doing more with travel and tourism worldwide at this point than the United States, which is pretty crazy, pretty scary, really shows the rise that China has taken. But yeah, of course, they've got 4 times as many people as we do here in the United States. So I understand that they are going to have more, but it really shows how much has changed in the last number of years. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to form a better relationship with the World Travel and Tourism Council. And they released their annual cities report during a recent Asia Leaders Forum in Macau. And I had the opportunity to speak with Rochelle Turner, who's the director of research at the WTTC. And she, really is in a great position to understand all of these things, right? So, China is having incredible growth in GDP growth, domestic spending, and investment growth. And it's absolutely spectacular. The only thing it hasn't beaten the United States in is visitor exports, where it ranked in 3rd position. But I have a feeling soon enough, they are going to be number 1 there too. So I want you to stick around because after the commercial break, I've got an incredible interview with Ms. Turner, and we're going to talk all about this issue, some of the other countries that are in the rankings, how everybody stands, and what the big deal is with all of this. So stick around, and just remember, you've only got one life, so blaze on, people, and we'll be right back after this message.
Have a question for your host, Glenn? Tweet him now at Traveling Glenn. No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, Glenn here. So there's been a lot going on at Red Roof this year. It had the introduction of their soft brand, the Red Collection, their new extended stay option, Hometown Studios by Red Roof, but there's one thing you can't overlook, and that's the Red Roof brand itself. After all, Red Roof offers one of the highest RevPARs in the economy segment and has been #1 in online guest reviews 8 years running, according to Clarabridge. They're careful to make sure standards reflect guest expectations, are fully tested, and well priced. In fact, they manage about 20% of the system, so they have skin in the game as well. And of course, Red Roof Plus, the brand extension that created the upscale economy market with wood-like flooring, high-end bedding, spa-inspired baths, enhanced landscaping, and more, all of it based on customer research, and all having a dramatic effect on owners' financial results. Plus, Red Roof offerings come with the Ready Card, a richest-in-class loyalty program with more than 2.5 million members. And it all just happens to be the least expensive loyalty program there is for owners. Put it all together, and it's no surprise, Red Roof has a franchise satisfaction of 94%. And those franchisees will tell you, genuine relationship, real results. It isn't just some slogan, it's just how Red Roof operates. To learn more, visit redrooffranchising.com or call 888-473-8861. That's redrooffranchising.com or call 888-473-8861. And tell them Glenn sent you.
Back to the show. It's No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast with your host, Glenn Hausman.
And welcome back to the No Vacancy Podcast with me, your host, Glenn Hausman. Excited to have you guys back here for another fun episode. This is an interview that I've been wanting to do for a while. I've always been a fan of the World Travel and Tourism Council, also known as the WTTC, and I finally got a great excuse in order to do it. They've released their annual cities report recently at the Asia Leaders Forum in Macau, and the report highlights the crucial importance of cities to travel and tourism all over the world and how vital the sector is for the economy. And you know how much I am passionate about this business. And believe it or not, there's over 500 million trips that are made to cities annually, representing 45% of global international travel. Wow, that is a huge number. So to take us through the results of this survey and the important stuff, I have Rochelle Turner, and she is Director of Research at the WTTC. How are you today, Rochelle?
I'm very well, thank you. The sun is shining, so it's a lovely day.
Wow, and you're over in the UK and the sun is shining? Wow, geez, that's
Great.
what an amazing event that you're having over there. Every single time I go over there, the weather seems to be lovely, but I don't think I've ever seen the sun in London. I think I've been there about 15 days so far this year.
Oh, wow. Well, unfortunate for you, but no, we're having a really lovely spate of autumn weather at the moment.
All right, I think the lesson to take away from this is you might want to ban me from the country because I'm not helping your weather at all.
Sounds like a good idea.
All right, so Rochelle, let's get into this. Let's get into this study, but first, I think I want to talk a little bit more about how you see the overall importance to freedom of movement around the world in order to help build up the global economy.
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction there, travel and tourism is an incredibly important part of the world economy. I mean, collectively, the whole sector represents 10.4% of global GDP. And not only that, but that stretches into jobs. So
Wow.
1 in every 10 people around the world is in some shape or form having a job because of travel and tourism, because of the movement of people for business, for leisure, for work, for play, for whatever reason, visiting friends and family. They are involved in our sector and involved in the global economy because of travel and tourism. So it's an important part of the world as we are more globalized. I mean, I've got a funny accent having grown up in Canada, now living in the UK. My family is around the world, and for many people that will be exactly the same. And so importance of being able to travel, to see family, to work, to, as I say, to just rest and relax and see the amazing wonders of the world. Phenomenal importance to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unbelievable to me that so much of the world's workforce is involved in just a single industry based on people traveling. And when we say 10% of people are engaged in this business, it's not just people that work in hotels, it's restaurants, it's the taxi cab industry, and it's all these other industries. Wherever you spend money around the world, those jobs are reflected as a percentage of that as well, correct?
That's absolutely right. I mean, and when we say industry, it's actually a number of industries. Mm-hmm. It's, as you say, it's hotels, it's car hire, it's aviation, it's cruise lines, it's banking and foreign currency exchange, it's insurance, and all of these companies, the big companies, are the ones that make up our members of travel and tourism. And we really work to give customers great experiences, but also to encourage travel around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that I've noticed about all of this is and I think you touched on it, it's really helped pulling people out of poverty and into a place where they could earn money for their family. I believe now, listeners, don't quote me on this number, but I feel like over 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 15, 20 years or so. And tourism, I think, has a big chunk to do with that. Alone. You see all the hotels that are being built and all of the different industries that pop up around it to help people. So, yeah, it's absolutely important. So let's talk a little bit about what this report is for and what are some of the big takeaways that you observed through this report.
So we know, and again, as you mentioned, travel and tourism is enormous, and particularly to cities, and cities represent 45% of all global international travel. So 500 million trips annually to cities around the world.
Right.
And as cities grow, as the world becomes more urbanized, and there is a movement from people living in the countrysides to the cities. At the moment, we have over half of the world live in cities, and by 2050, that's looking at almost 70% of the global population will live in cities. And as we move to cities,
that's unbelievable. And one of the places I think you're seeing this phenomenon is in China in particular. A lot of people coming out from the farming country and really building up these cities. And one of the things, a large percentage of my audience here is in the United States, and I don't think people understand that we think like New York and LA here in the United States is a big city, but that wouldn't even crack like the top 20 in China with the way their cities have been growing.
That's true. That's true.
All right, so go on, continue. I didn't mean to sidetrack you. I just like to give a little perspective every once in a while.
Yeah, that's no worries. As cities gain in importance, the power of the importance of their tax raising powers, the importance of the rules that they are able to produce, and what they are actually able to influence either business or consumers directly is growing. And so therefore, it's really important to understand where travel and tourism that the governments themselves of the cities can start to understand a little bit more about how they need to structure their cities, how they need to involve tourism in their decision making, and how they need to create systems that include the visitor and include the tourist, as well as not alienating the local people who are living there in the first place.
That's so true. One of the issues that I speak a lot about, and I've spoken about it here on the No Vacancy podcast. I've spoken about it on my Checking In with Anthony and Glenn podcast. If you folks haven't listened to that show that I do with Travel Channel host Anthony Melchiori from Hotel Impossible, we need to talk a little bit more about that whole over-tourism thing. And there's a whole balance here that has to happen between making sure that people have jobs, but that the distinct neighborhoods aren't destroyed at the same time. So it's a real tough balance I think some major cities are finding right now.
Well, it's not the whole city. It's parts within cities, but you're absolutely right. And tourism needs to be part of that conversation. It needs to be part of the planning. There needs to be long-term vision, and there needs to be funding for understanding and doing research like we have done on the importance of different elements of tourism to a city, and where, if there are those conflicts, where they exist. Right.
Makes sense. So one of the things that struck me as absolutely incredible was Cairo was the fastest growing city in 2017 in terms of travel and tourism GDP contribution. It exploded 34.4%. That is an insane number, especially considering here we're being trained in the United States to think that going to Egypt is pretty dangerous right now.
Well, the number, if you look at it just year on year, is a little bit disingenuous. So what's happened in Cairo, as you know, they have had...
Yeah, go on.
Cairo has had a very difficult time over the last few years with terrorism, with the bombing of a plane, with so many issues, which means that tourism since 2010, when it was at a peak, has gone considerably down. And actually, the number of visitors that are in Cairo now are not at the level of what they were back in 2010. However, what we see year on year is that since they have improved their security and their stability, and visitors are starting to come back, you see these tremendous growths and the tremendous jumps on a year on year basis.
I see.
So we have seen on an annual basis this 30+% growth in Cairo, but actually, as I said, it's not yet at a figure where it was back in 2010 before it had all of the troubles and the security.
Okay, I get it, because that reminds me of, as a hotel industry journalist, I spent a lot of years going to events, and I'd be sitting down with an interview with someone from a company, for say like a management company or something, and they're going to be like, we're going to double the size of our portfolio in the next 2 years. We're going to have 100% growth. But then you realize they have 2 properties, so they only need 2 properties. So all of a sudden, that number's not as exciting or impressive anymore. So thanks for giving me the context on that. So let's talk a little bit about China. What do you see happening in China right now? Because that's a pretty amazing place that we don't think enough about, I don't believe.
Well, you're right. I mean, there is a huge movement from the south to the north and from west to east, and everything these days is all about China. And China, for amazing reasons, is growing considerably. So, we already know it's got 1.3 billion people that live in China, but we also know that only about 9% of them have passports and travel internationally. So we also know that within the next 10 years, there's about 65 million people who will be joining the middle class. And usually it's the middle class that then have enough disposable income that allow them to travel.
Right.
Now, compared to the next country down, the next country with as many people joining the middle class is India. Only 9 million will join the middle class over the next 10 years in India. So we see tremendous growth out of China for tourism. And actually, almost all of the countries all of the cities in our fastest growing cities over the next 10 years are in either China or the Asia Pacific region. Now, tourism is funny that we all think about tourism being international, but actually 72% of all tourism is domestic.
Yeah, and I don't know why we think that way, because most people I know, Rochelle, are traveling domestically. They aren't traveling all over the world. So why do you think we discount that and don't really think about that in the proper context?
You don't think about it in the proper context because if you think about it from an economic perspective, countries that are getting visitors from an external market don't have to make those goods themselves. They are getting new money that comes into their country, just as if they were building cars and exporting them across the world. They are bringing tourists to their countries because they obviously can't export their country across the world. Yes. So they are bringing new money into a place, and that new money is then able to filter around the economy and pay for schools and jobs and roads, etc. Now, with domestic tourism, if you're not spending money on a destination, then you might be spending it on something else which is within your country. And so you're just moving money around that's already been established within the economy within a country.
Right. So you're not adding anything more to the pot. You're just stirring. The pot, which makes a lot of sense to me. And here in the United States, we always love to talk about that, where that international traveler coming to the United States is our best export because they stay longer, they spend more money, and then they go home with the goodwill that, hey, maybe that our country isn't as bad as it's being presented in the news, for example. I also think, travel really helps you to get to understand other cultures, other people is a real unifying factor. But more so than that, I want to go back to India for a second. How are those people moving around? Because we really think about India here in the United States as, folks of Indian heritage own about half the hotels, and then they go back there every year for weddings or just to make a pilgrimage home. But there's an insanely vibrant tourism community that's starting to occur there.
Absolutely. And we see huge growth in domestic tourism in India. We see growth in business travel and in the outbound market as well. So, as I said, there are another 9 million people will join the middle classes in India over the next 10 years. Currently, it is a very large market. And actually, some figures out of the International Aviation Authority, IATA, have said that India is actually going to grow from number 7 in the world in terms of international flights now to number 3 in the world over the next 10 years for international flights. So again, a huge market, huge opportunities. And huge potential for travel and tourism.
Yeah, you mentioned flights, and I'm not sure how much insight you have on this, but That's really the key here, is building a global air network here. And anecdotally, I'm seeing it explode. Airplane orders with both Boeing and Airbus, for example, have been absolutely tremendous over the last decade. China is building at least 4 dozen airports, as far as I know. How critical is air travel in order to help propel the continued growth of travel and tourism in the decades to come?
Air growth is absolutely essential to travel and tourism, and particularly to the international market. I ought to expect the numbers of air travelers to grow from 4 billion now to about 8.2 billion by 2037. It's a long way off, but still, we're talking about huge numbers, largely in parts of Asia where there is little or it's nascent tourism development at the moment. So it's not necessarily to scare your listeners and tell them that the airports around them are necessarily going to be growing any bigger. It is really this growth in certain parts of the world that tourism has not yet developed, and that's where we're seeing a lot more of the growth than in anywhere else.
Yeah, and for here in New York, for example, we're rebuilding our LaGuardia Airport right now. Not because there's going to be a lot more people coming; it's limited in size with the amount of planes it could take every single day. But because the infrastructure just sucks, so we're not building to bring in new people as much as we're just trying to bring it up to the standards of some of the amazing airports I've seen around the world, including places like Shanghai, which, for me, is one of the best airports I've ever been to, because I haven't been to Singapore or Hong Kong yet. But Shanghai, it's one of those cities that you're tracking that's really exploding right now in travel and tourism, direct contribution to GDP, correct?
Absolutely. For most of the cities that we have looked at, it is the Asian ones, and particularly the Chinese ones, where travel and tourism has grown the most and represents the most contribution to GDP. So Shanghai, you're right. $35 billion in 2017 was directly related to travel and tourism. So a huge proportion of money. Ooh. Beijing is second, is nearly as high at $32.5 billion into their economy from travel and tourism. And as I said, most of their market is domestic. And over the next few years, they are going to be growing upwards of 7.5–8%, those countries, year on year for the next 10 years. And so they are looking to expand and are expanding and building airports, high-speed rail, hotels, and all of the infrastructure needed to support that growth.
So that's interesting that you mentioned that Beijing relies a lot on domestic travel right now, and that'll change. And Paris relies heavily on an international spend to propel their tourism industry. So what does that mean in terms of a city for Paris? Because to me, it feels like it's easier to grow to bring more people in internationally than it is to prompt the locals to come to your city. Or maybe I'm just far off, because we've had a lot of growth here in the New York area with domestic travel too.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily think or easier for one or the other. I think
right.
It's a different kind of challenge.
Right.
So if you're attracting international visitors, you need to think about what language skills your destination may have to support the countries that you're trying to attract. Are they able to move around in the same way that the locals move around? Or people who already know the systems because they've grown up or understand the country are able to move around. We have a lot of growth in the Muslim market, and Muslim travelers tend not to want to stay in places where there is alcohol, for example, or there is a number of facilities that they may require in the hotels that are different to what other domestic guests or other international guests may require as well. So are those facilities for those types of individual and international travelers available in the form that you need them to be? In the case of Paris, it's interesting. You're right that most of its visitors are international. Those international visitors on the whole tend to spend more money than domestic visitors. And so they can get a smaller number of visitors overall, but get more money because the money that is being spent is going further and is filtering into the economy in a much more potent way than perhaps it would be with domestic travelers.
Interesting. I think the most interesting thing that I found out of this entire report that you put out there is that, us here in the USA are not the number one destination in terms of GDP for tourism and travel anymore. That has moved over to China now. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, there are some. You're still currently the number one in terms of people coming and spending money in the U.S. So in terms of what we call visitor exports, so the dollars that are spent by foreign visitors in the country, the U.S. is still number one.
Right.
Now that may change because, as we say, we have 1.3 billion Chinese visitors and many people around the world who want to go and visit China. So that over time is likely to change. But you're right, the domestic market, the outbound market, the U.S. is not the dominant force anymore. And so this movement east is something that we're seeing. And therefore, our destinations set up to attract the kinds of visitors that might be coming from the east. They have largely dealt with Western audiences in many cases, and they know the needs of those visitors, and it just now requires a shift in the marketing, but also in the product that they're providing.
Right, and it only makes sense that China is going to be the number one in time because they've got 4 times as many people as we do here in the United States, and even if we continue to grow our global percentage of travelers coming here, we're still not going to be able to keep up with the sheer force of those numbers that they have in China. So all that makes all of it comes together to make a lot of sense to me. So is there anything else that we haven't had a chance to discuss that you think is really important in terms of what your report has discovered?
Well, I think what is really interesting is that if you think of the how tourism develops, tourism develops through domestic, as people move up through becoming into the middle class. You start traveling locally first, then you travel regionally, and then you might travel further afield as you become more experienced with travel and you get more money. You also travel at an international level. Business travel grows first. The businesses come in, they have hotels because they or in trade, and they need to have the facilities for business travelers. Business travelers then might be encouraged to spend a few days, and you start building up that leisure market. So it's almost like a cycle of growth from the domestic side, but then also from the business side to the leisure side. And so many of the destinations that we're seeing growing on the business side are very much the sort of emerging markets, developing markets, countries around the world where one might initially think, oh, wow, I didn't think that they had tourism, or maybe even I didn't even know that those countries existed. So, countries like Georgia and Rwanda, Nicaragua, doing really well over the last few years in terms of growing their business travel and their domestic travel because of the growing economies in these places and the strength of the emerging markets.
Does one typically grow quicker than the other in emerging markets? Because I look at Colombia, for example, and they seem to have woken up in the last 10 years to a lot of business travel. And then it felt like then the domestic travel came afterwards. But is that true? Or do they just kind of, work in concert with each other?
I think they tend to work in concert with each other. And a lot will depend on the kind of businesses that are in those markets and where those business travelers are coming from as well.
All right, excellent. So what's going on in Turkey, for example? Because this made your number 7 on the Power and Performance ranking, but they have been going through a tumultuous time lately, and people are starting to get a little anxious about the whole idea of Turkey.
Well, as I mentioned with what happened in Egypt, Turkey, as you said, did go through a tumultuous time. And so some of the latest rebound is just a symptom of recovery from how far they had fallen before.
Right.
So Turkey has a very developed travel and tourism market. It has a huge inbound market, but it also is big within the region of regional outbound travel. And actually, it has performed exceptionally well in terms of bringing visitors into the country and spending money from external visitors. I live in the UK, and a lot of what we call package holiday trips, so tour operator holidays in the summertime, go to the beaches in Turkey. And it's a huge market for many Brits as well as many other Europeans into that market. As I say, it's had a lot of difficulty over the last few years with some of the security issues, but it does seem to be recovering now. And it's done particularly well on investment. And we know that investors, if they're putting money in, are expecting long-term returns. So I think that's always a good sign.
Yeah, I totally agree. Excellent. So, Rochelle, I think we've covered this pretty darn well. What is your takeaway for the overall state of global tourism and its future?
Travel and tourism is one of the real growth industries of the future. And not only is it growing in terms of absolute terms, but in terms of really bringing up countries that are developing and emerging and giving them opportunities in terms of employment and also regional and national pride in the products and services that they're able to showcase to the world. I think it's an incredible industry with a real opportunity to do good in these places.
Excellent. So that's terrific. So, Rochelle, before we wrap up, I'd love to give you the opportunity for a good shameless plug about the World Travel and Tourism Council and your research report.
Well, actually, I will give a shameless plug about an amazing awards program that we have.
Tell me.
Travel and Tourism for Tomorrow Awards. We call them Tourism for Tomorrow Awards, which is about showcasing best practice and sustainability on a number of different elements. And we close our awards on the 14th of November. And we would encourage applications from all over the world on if your company or organization is doing amazing things on sustainability. We want to know about it. And please see our website, WTTC.org, and please apply for a Tourism for Tomorrow award.
Yes, and you can always just go to that web address plus a /tourism-for-tomorrow-awards, and you can find it, or just do what I did really quick to sound like I know what I'm talking about. I just typed in Tourism for Tomorrow Awards, and boom, Google told me how to get there. So that's really perfect. Rochelle, thank you so much for being here with me today, and I want to thank all the listeners for being here today. It's amazing to see the incredible growth and power that tourism brings to our global economy. It's so critical. It's so important. And here in the United States, where we seem to be looking a little bit more inward, I would really encourage us all to look a little bit more outward. It's going to be more financially viable for absolutely everyone to find success, to find enjoyment, and knock down those barriers and help us all realize that, you know what, we're all the same. We're all part of the common human experience, and we should all be in it together. Thanks for being here today, and I'm going to be back next week. That is, unless I decide to go check out for the 5 fastest growing cities in China: Chongqing, Chengdu, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. So for Glenn Hausman, I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks so much for listening to No Vacancy, the hospitality industry's #1 podcast, with your host, Glenn Hausman, online at rouse.media, on Twitter at Traveling Glenn, and on Facebook.com/Glenn.Hausman. We'll catch you next time.